G'day, we're having a look at Ecclesiastes chapter 10, and at first glance it just seems like a string of proverbs, metaphors, images, ideas that aren't particularly connected to the flow of argument, but I think they are. I think there is a thread here because he's been talking about the contrast between wisdom and foolishness, and what we'll see as we look here are a number of themes that relate to the contrast between the wise and the foolish. So, pick it up at Ecclesiastes chapter 10, first verse. As dead flies give perfume a bad smell, so a little folly outweighs wisdom and honour. The heart of the wise inclines to the right, but the heart of the fool to the left. Even as fools walk along the road, they lack sense and show everyone how stupid they are. The first three verses here, they're all tied up with this contrast between wise and foolish. And I can tell you, by immediate experience, it's better to be wise than to be foolish. I have just done some foolish stuff. What did I do? Well, I didn't check the framing of this video. And I recorded a talk and went from beginning to end without bothering to check. Now, I usually do. And then I was about to upload it, and I thought I should just check it. And I'd cut half my head off. Anyway, so I'm doing it again, hopefully having learned a little wisdom. But wisdom here is not simply about practical sense, and foolishness is not simply about low IQ or being stupid. In fact, in the Bible, it says in Psalm 14, the fool says in his heart, there is no God. Kind of practical atheism, living with disregard for God altogether. And that's foolish, it's dangerous. And the Bible is speaking pretty seriously about the consequences of living like that. And here in Ecclesiastes, you get some examples. So first of all, there's this picture of dead flies in the sweet perfume. And wisdom is related to the perfume, dead flies to the folly. And I don't know exactly what dead flies are supposed to smell like, but I do know what flies eat and where they hang around. And so dead flies are pretty likely to make good perfume stink. And so foolishness can really undo and undermine wisdom. The idea here of the heart of the wise inclining to the right and the fool to the left, it's not making a political statement. It's not saying, look, you're wise if you're right wing and foolish if you're left wing. It's not saying anything like that. It's saying that the right way is to be right-handed and the wrong way is to be left-handed. In fact, did you know that in the Latin, the word sinister means left-handed? So all of those sinister people out there, a lot of them playing cricket for Australia, sinister, you see, it's a metaphor of the idea of right being to go aright, whereas left being to go astray. And there's a connection between wisdom leading to right living and foolishness leading to living astray, living down the left, the sinister way. And so too in verse 3, fools walk along the road, they lack sense, and they tell people how foolish they are. I don't know whether it's the fact that they're just carrying on and so people see their foolishness, or whether they're so obsessed with themselves being wise, even though they're foolish, that they're going on telling everybody else how foolish they are. I think you could take it either way, and I'm not sure. Verse 4, if a ruler's anger rises against you, do not leave your post. Calmness can lay great offences to rest. Here's some practical wisdom. Let's say the ruler or your employer or somebody has it in for you. How to respond? Well, you could fight back. Yeah, that's one strategy. You could flee, run away. That's another strategy. Fight or flight. But there's another approach here. That is calmness. Calmness. And maybe like the wise man, the wise poor man in the city back in chapter 9 who was able to save the city from the siege of this powerful army. So maybe the wise, calm way will overcome the problems of the tyranny of the boss or the ruler. Certainly I think it's the case that sometimes we get so indignant and so driven by a desire to put things right, to get revenge, or maybe we call it justice, that really we suffer twice, from the action of the perpetrator and then from our reaction in not being able to let it go. There's a wisdom in being able to let things go. Verse 5, there's an evil I've seen under the sun, the sort of error that arises from a ruler. Fools are put in many high positions, while the rich occupy the low ones. I've seen slaves on horseback, while princes go on foot like slaves. He looks around and he sees foolish people in positions of leadership. Now, I don't know what he'd been looking at, whether he'd been looking at governments, politicians, prime ministers, presidents, kings, emperors, who knows? But the sad reality is sometimes the foolish one ends up in a position of enormous power and influence. And again, it's not talking about low IQ. Sometimes what you see as you look at this leader, this ruler, is a very, very smart person, but they just cannot see the truth. They just are blinded to God, sometimes blinded to the people around about them. They're so full of themselves. Well, there's lessons to be learned here. Wisdom is to be sought after. Foolishness is to be avoided. Verses 8 and 9 are a little harder to work out. Whoever digs a pit may fall into it. Whoever breaks through a wall may be bitten by a snake. Whoever quarries stones may be injured by them. Whoever splits logs may be endangered by them. It may be simply saying, look, if you do stuff, you've got the potential of being hurt by it. That would be a truism. It doesn't mean you will get hurt, but there's the possibility if you do things like dig pits and split logs and so on, that you might get hurt. But there may be something else at work here as well, because we know, even examples in the Bible, that sometimes the reasons that people were digging pits, for example, was to throw people into them. And maybe it's saying, well, you could go about this in a foolish way and then suffer from it yourself. Or it could be simply pointing us to the fact that we need insight, we need wisdom, and we'll never make sense of life unless we find it. And then, verse 10, if the axe is dull and its edge unsharpened, more strength is needed, but skill will bring success. It's a familiar picture, this one. I remember buying a book in the 1990s called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and there's a chapter in there called Sharpening the Saw. And he talks about two people. They're both lumberjacks. They're working on trees. One's sawing flat out, and he never stops. He keeps going and he keeps going, and he's doing it for hours and hours, doing it for a whole day. At the end of the day, they count the amount of trees and branches that have been cut down. But there's another guy, and every hour he stops for 5 minutes, has a bit of a rest, and then he goes back to work again. At the end of the day, his pile is so much bigger. Cut down more trees, more branches. Why is that? Well, it might be because he had a bit of a rest. But no, the bigger reason is he stopped to sharpen the saw. And the first person was just working with a blunt instrument. Ineffective. Now, secular wisdom's got hold of this, hasn't it? You go to those bookshops at the airports and you can see books on how to work smarter, not harder. That seems to be a theme written in different ways. This idea that with a bit of wisdom, we can achieve more. But deep down, friends, that wisdom will only take you so far. The wisdom that Ecclesiastes is pointing us to find is the wisdom that can only be found in God himself. Indeed, Jesus taught a lot about wisdom. He spoke about two people who built houses. And the wise man built his house on rock. The foolish man built his house on sand. Guess what happened? We live just off the beach. If you were to build a house on the sand down there, don't think it'd last very long. In fact, you can look at suburbs in Australia where the houses are literally falling into the water. And you can see those that are solidly planted on the rock and they're not going to move. And Jesus says it's a bit like how you respond to my words. See, the wise one listens to my words and responds, and the foolish one disregards them and lives as he pleases. Friends, if you want to be wise, then listen to the words of Jesus, because he has the words of eternal life. He wants us to take hold of that.